Captain Jack Sullivan, a retired Navy vet, thought his days of service were over until a frantic baby whale led him to a toxic trap in Monterey. He didn't know it yet, but a life was hanging by a thread. The morning air in Monterey Bay has a way of clinging to you like an old damp wool blanket. It is a mix of salt, diesel, and that cold, biting Pacific mist that blurs the line between the sky and the deep blue. For Captain Jack Sullivan, a 65-year-old retired Navy commander, this mist was a sanctuary. It was quiet. It was honest. After 30 years of service on aircraft carriers and destroyers, Jack had retired to his vintage wooden boat, the Sea Sentinel. He spent his golden years documenting the migration of whales, a peaceful mission for a man who had seen enough of the world's darker side. He liked the rhythm of the waves. He liked the way the ocean didn't care about your rank or your past. But on this particular Tuesday in September, the ocean decided to speak in a voice Jack could not ignore. The water didn't just ripple. It broke with a sense of desperate urgency that Jack had only felt once before, during a rescue mission in the South China Sea. A young humpback calf, no more than 15 feet long, surfaced with a startling thud just inches from Jack's hull. This wasn't the usual playful breach of a happy calf. There was no joy here. The animal was shivering, a rhythmic, violent shaking that Jack could feel through the wooden deck of his boat. Its skin looked pale, almost translucent under the gray morning light. The calf began to bump its head against the side of the Sea Sentinel, a dull, heavy drumming that vibrated in Jack's chest. Jack stood up, his old knees popping like dry twigs as he leaned over the railing. He looked down into a giant dark eye. It was staring directly at him. It wasn't a look of animal curiosity. It was a look of pure, raw, naked terror. It was a cry for help from a soul that had run out of options. The calf swam a few yards away toward the open canyon, stopped, and looked back. It waited. Then it did it again. It was a classic let-out maneuver. In the Navy, they taught you to recognize a distress signal in any form. Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. "All right, kid," Jack whispered, his voice gravelly and low. "I'm with you. Show me the way." He threw the engine into gear, and the Sea Sentinel began to follow the small, trembling guide out toward the dark, bottomless blue where the big shadows live. As the boat hummed along, Jack went into combat mode. It was a mental switch he hadn't flipped in years. He checked his radio. He checked his fuel. He looked at his old diving gear in the corner. He felt his pulse quickening, a steady drumbeat in his ears. He tried to tell himself he was just an old man on a boat, but the watch officer in his brain had already taken the helm. He thought about his late wife, Martha. She used to say the ocean was a living, breathing thing with a memory longer than any human. Jack never quite believed her until he saw that calf's eye. It was like looking at a person who was watching their world fall apart. You might wonder why a wild creature would trust a human, but as Jack was about to find out, the calf had no other choice. This wasn't a meeting. It was a last, desperate gamble on the heart of a stranger. 2 miles out, right over the deepest part of the Monterey Canyon, the calf stopped. It began to circle a patch of water that was eerily still. Jack cut the engine, and the silence of the Pacific rushed in, heavy and thick. Then he saw her. A massive humpback whale, a 50-foot matriarch, was suspended just below the surface. But she didn't look like a whale. She looked like a ghost trapped in a cage of stone. Her entire body was covered in a thick, gray, crusty layer of barnacles and sea lice, more than Jack had ever seen on a living animal. It was so dense it looked like she was wearing a suit of heavy armor. But that wasn't the horror. Wrapped around her tail and digging deep into her pectoral fins was a massive, jagged industrial net. This wasn't just a stray fishing line. It was a ghost net from an illegal commercial trawler. It was tattered, weighted with lead, and stained with a sickly, neon green slime. As Jack leaned over the rail, his stomach turned. The net was cutting into her flesh like a dull, rusted saw. Every time she tried to move, the net tightened its grip. But there was something even more haunting. The water around her was shimmering with an oily, chemical sheen. Jack realized with a jolt of fury that this wasn't just a physical trap, it was a poison trap. The green slime on the net was a banned chemical coating used by illegal vessels to prevent sea growth. It was dissolving her skin and seeping into her bloodstream. The mother whale gave a weak, wet puff from her blowhole. It sounded like a sob. She was dying in slow motion, trapped in a cage of toxic nylon, while her calf watched her fade into the dark. Jack's hands began to shake with a burning, righteous anger. "Hang on," he growled, grabbing his heavy cutting knife. "The Navy's here now." Jack grabbed his long-range radio. He needed the heavy hitters. He called NOAA in the Monterey Bay rescue team. A voice came back. It was Dr. Sarah Peterson, a woman who had spent 20 years protecting these waters. She told him a rescue boat was 40 minutes out. Jack looked at the mother whale. Her head was beginning to sink. The calf was underneath her, trying to lift her with its own small head, but she was too heavy. She didn't have 40 minutes. Her lungs were filling with carbon dioxide and her heart was struggling against the toxic load. But the toxic net wasn't the only thing waiting for her. In the shadows of the deep, the lions of the sea had already smelled her weakness, and they were coming to claim their prize. Predators are the tax collectors of the ocean. They know when a life is forfeit, and they come to collect. From the dark depths of the canyon, the shadows began to rise. First it was the sea lions, but not the playful ones you see barking at tourists on the pier. These were the big bulls, the sea lions that Jack called the true lions of the bay. They were massive, aggressive, and they began to snap at the whale's exposed fins, taking advantage of her paralysis. But then, a much darker, colder shadow emerged from the abyss. A great white shark. The shark was at least 15 feet of pure prehistoric muscle. It sensed the mother whale's heart rate slowing. It began to circle, its black, empty eyes fixed on the whale's vulnerable tail. The baby whale grew frantic, splashing its small tail and whistling a warning, but it was like a child trying to stop an armored truck. Jack knew that if that shark took just one bite, the massive blood loss would kill the mother whale in seconds. "Not on my watch," Jack roared, his voice echoing across the empty water. He didn't have a rifle, but he had 30 years of Navy tactical training and a boat built of solid oak. He grabbed a heavy metal flare canister and a long steel boat hook. He began to bang the canister against the side of the Sea Sentinel, creating a rhythmic metallic vibration that he knew would irritate the shark's sensitive electrical receptors. It was a psychological war. Then Jack did something that would have made his old commanders lose their minds. He put the Sea Sentinel into gear and began to circle the whale. He was using his own boat, his only home, as a physical shield. He maneuvered the wooden hull directly between the great white and the whale's bleeding tail. The shark bumped the boat, a heavy thudding whack that made the wood groan and the deck tilt. Jack almost went over the rail. "Come on, you coward!" he yelled, revving the engine to its limit to create a wall of bubbles and noise. For 20 agonizing minutes, it was a battle of nerves. The sea lions were barking and lunging from the left, and the shark was looking for an opening from below. Jack was sweating through his flannel shirt, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was one man, on an old boat, standing against the apex predators of the Pacific. At one point, the great white surged upward, its jaws opening to reveal rows of jagged, serrated teeth. Jack didn't flinch. He grabbed a heavy bag of lead diving weights and threw it with all his might, hitting the shark right on its sensitive snout. The predator flinched, thrashed its tail, and dove back into the deep. But the stress was too much for the mother whale. As Jack fought off the predators, he looked back and saw her blowhole stop moving. Her massive body began to tilt to the side. The weight of the toxic net and the exhaustion of the fight were pulling her down into the darkness of the canyon. The calf began to scream, a high-pitched, piercing whistle that vibrated through the very wood of Jack's boat. It was a sound of pure grief. Jack felt a lump in his throat that nearly choked him. He had held off the lions, but he was losing the prize. Just as he was about to lose hope, a flash of orange appeared on the horizon. The roar of a high-powered turbine engine cut through the air. The Noe rescue boat, led by Dr. Sarah, slammed through the swells at 40 knots. "Jack, move back!" she shouted over the loudspeaker. "We're taking over!" Amilarwam, Jack steered his boat clear, his arms shaking from the effort of the fight. He had held the line long enough. The professionals were here, but the mother whale was already slipping beneath the waves. The rescue team went to work with the precision of a surgical unit. Divers hopped into the freezing water with specialized hydraulic cutters. Jack watched from his deck, his chest heaving. He saw the massive chunks of the toxic net falling away, sinking into the dark. But Sarah's face was grim. She was huddled over a heart rate monitor connected to an underwater sensor. "Jack, she's flatlining," Sarah whispered over the radio, her voice breaking. "The poison. It shut her down." "We're too late." They had removed the net, but the damage was already done. The mother whale was sinking. But Jack Sullivan didn't believe in giving up on a comrade, even if that comrade weighed 40 tons. The scene was devastating. The mother whale had sunk to nearly 15 feet deep. The divers were struggling to stay with her. The calf was swimming in circles, frantic, occasionally diving down to nudge its mother's head, trying to push her back to the surface so she could breathe. It was a display of love that made every person on those boats fall silent. Jack stood on his deck, staring into the water. He couldn't accept it. He had fought the sharks. He had followed the calf. This couldn't be the end. Dr. Sarah was calling for the divers to surface. "It's too dangerous," she cried. "The boat's drift is too heavy." But Jack grabbed his binoculars. He saw something, a tiny microscopic flicker of a pectoral fin, a ripple in the water near her blowhole. "Sarah!" Jack yelled. "She's still in there. She's like a deer hit by a car. She's in shock, but she's still alive. Look at her eye." Sarah looked at the monitor. There was a spike, a tiny, weak electrical pulse. The whale wasn't dead. She was in a state of toxic catatonia. Her body had shut down to protect her brain from the chemicals. "We have to move now," Sarah shouted. She grabbed a specialized 3-foot-long pressure needle filled with a massive dose of adrenaline and heart stimulants. "I have to hit the cardiac muscle directly." This was the most dangerous part of the mission. Sarah had to lean out over the side of the rescue boat, timed perfectly with the rising and falling swells. If she missed, she could lose the needle or injure the whale further. If the whale reacted violently, the splash could flip the small rescue craft. "Steady!" Jack called out, using his boat to block the wind and calm the water for Sarah. Sarah leaned out, her hair whipping in the wind. She waited for the whale's body to rise with the surge. "Now!" she screamed. She plunged the needle deep into the whale's side, right behind the pectoral fin. She pushed the plunger down with all her strength, emptying the life-saving cocktail into the giant's bloodstream. 5 seconds passed. 10. The ocean was eerily quiet. Even the gulls had stopped crying. Suddenly, a massive, thunderous thump shook the water. It was a sound so deep it felt like an earthquake. It was the sound of a heart the size of a car engine jumping back to life. The mother whale's tail gave a violent, powerful twitch, sending a wall of water over the rescue boat. She surged upward, her massive head breaking the surface like a surfacing submarine. She took in a massive, ragged, explosive breath of air, a sound that could be heard for miles. "She's breathing!" the divers shouted, surfacing and pumping their fists. The mother whale didn't just breathe. She began to fight. She thrashed her tail, clearing the last of the net remnants. The water she sprayed from her blowhole was clear and strong. The calf was leaping clear out of the water in a series of joy breaches, splashing down with thunderous claps. Jack fell back into his pilot's chair, his face wet with salt and tears. He had seen a lot of things in his life, wars, storms, and tragedies, but he had never seen a resurrection. The team worked for another 4 hours, using specialized vacuums to clean the chemical residue from her skin and injecting her with high-grade antibiotics. They moved her and the calf to a protected cove near Point Lobos to monitor her. Jack didn't go home. He dropped his anchor nearby and stayed up all night, watching the 2 dark shadows in the moonlight. He watched the mother start to swim in slow, graceful circles. He watched the calf nuzzle her side. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't known since Martha passed away. He realized that he hadn't just saved a whale. He had saved himself from the silence of his own life. The next morning, the sun broke through the fog, turning Monterey Bay into a sheet of hammered gold. Dr. Sarah pulled up alongside the Sea Sentinel. "She's going to make it, Jack," she said, her eyes red from lack of sleep but shining with joy. "The blood tests are coming back clean. You were right. You didn't let her go." Jack just nodded, sipping a cup of cold coffee. He didn't need a medal. He just needed to see them swim away. Jack thought that was the end, a great story to tell at the pier. But the ocean has a long memory. And 1 year later, Big Mama came back to deliver a message Jack would never forget. The seasons changed. Autumn turned to a stormy winter, and then spring brought the wildflowers back to the California coast. Jack continued his work, but his boat felt a little lighter. He often looked out at the canyon and wondered where they were. Had they made it to the warm waters of Hawaii? Was the calf growing? He felt a bond with those animals that transcended language. He had seen their souls in that moment of crisis. It was exactly 1 year later, almost to the hour. Jack was drifting in the same spot over the Monterey Canyon. The water was a deep, sparkling sapphire. He was thinking about Martha, wondering if she could see him now. Suddenly, the sonar on his boat began to chirp. Something huge was rising from the depths. A massive humpback whale, Big Mama, leaped clear out of the water in a spectacular, gravity-defying breach. She was even larger now, her skin smooth and glowing like polished silver. And right next to her, a much larger calf did the same. They weren't hunting. They weren't just passing through. They were looking for the Sea Sentinel. They swam directly up to the boat. Jack stood at the rail, his heart in his throat. The mother whale slowed down until she was drifting perfectly still, her massive body alongside the wooden hull. She turned her head, and that giant golden eye looked right at him. This time there was no terror. There was only recognition. Then she did something that made Jack's breath catch. She used her massive pectoral fin, the one that had been nearly shredded by the net, and she gently, softly tapped the side of Jack's boat. Tap, tap. It was a salute, a sign of respect from one veteran of the sea to another. Then mother and son dived together. As their tails rose into the air, they paused for a long second, silhouetted against the bright blue sky. It was a perfect V for victory. They slipped into the deep, leaving nothing but a circle of calm water and a memory that would warm Jack's soul for the rest of his days. Jack stood on his deck, waving at the empty ocean, tears of pure joy streaming down his face. He wasn't just an old man on a boat anymore. He was a guardian. He was a part of something eternal. Jack steered the Sea Sentinel back toward the harbor. The fog was rolling in again, but it didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like a warm embrace. He knew that out there, in the vast, deep blue, two giants were swimming free because he had chosen to listen when the ocean called. Friends, stories like Captain Jack's remind us that hope is never lost as long as we have the courage to act. It reminds us that every life, no matter how large or small, is worth fighting for. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment below. I want to hear your stories of hope and kindness. And if you want to see more incredible rescues that prove the beauty of our world, please click on the next video right here. There are so many heroes among us, and I can't wait to share their stories with you. God bless you, and stay kind to one another.